My name is Samantha Lukashevitz,
No.
and I'm the AmeriCorps manager for the commission. And Annalise is here with me. If you don't introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Analise Gamble, and I'm the statewide engagement officer here at Serve Virginia, and excited to be supporting Samantha in talking about kind of some of the ways to keep your AmeriCorps program in line as you consider having members.
Our agenda is background and staffing, separation of duties, different models that we have currently in the portfolio as it pertains to staffing, and then some activities that the roles at your organization can do to support your AmeriCorps program. You're going to see different models that are currently in the portfolio. They're not the only ones that are in the portfolio as it comes to staffing and backgrounds, but we're just giving suggestions about what your program model could look like. If you're interested in being an intermediary, it's going to look different. If you're interested in just being a host site and hosting 1 or 2 members, it's going to look different. But this is from the perspective of the grantee. Okay. So when and if that you're applying to the RFA, which comes out in February, these are going to be some of the things that we're looking at when we ask about your organizational background. So you're detailing the roles, responsibilities, and the structure of your staff. So we have this thing called covered staff, where you can have a program director or some of your other staff who are working with your program build to the grant. But that doesn't mean that those are the only folks who are working on your program. So sometimes you have, accountants, or you have an HR person that support your program on the back end, and you can claim those in your indirect costs. And we'll talk about that next week with budgets. But we're just looking at holistically within your narrative about how you plan on supporting your AmeriCorps members and supporting your program. So who's providing oversight? Is that a program director? Is that a CEO? Who's monitoring the program? Do you have a compliance team? Do you have a fiscal officer? Do you have an HR rep? That kind of thing. And how are they supporting the program? We're interested to see if you facilitated or partnered or participated in workforce development programs. Not everybody has experience with AmeriCorps. This is a great opportunity, obviously, to get exposure. But if you have worked with pre-apprenticeship programs or job training programs, that's going to be helpful in translating into an AmeriCorps program. They're similar, they're different, there's different terms and conditions, obviously. But if I've said this before, AmeriCorps is not just a program grant, it's a people grant. So if you've worked with managing people in different projects, you're going to be successful in managing your members. And then your applicant, your organization, so whoever is applying has definitions of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility within your framework of your programming and your organization. And that goes to your board and your volunteers and your leadership. So we're just interested in seeing your perspective on that. This is a separation of duties. This is what we talk about when we look at internal controls of your organization and the fidelity of the use of federal funds. And so we would ask this usually when we do a monitoring, but I think it's a good way to just see where you are at organizationally in your own support of how you run these things. Do you have a separation of duties, or is it just one person who's handling cash, who's doing the bookkeeping, who's doing the payroll, who's doing the financial reporting? This is just organizational development type things. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with this. And if you're not, you will be soon. So we ask, who's the person? Are they receiving cash? Is there any oversight? We do, so this gets into the weeds, but AmeriCorps members are not employees, but you do pay them from your payroll system. They are W-2 and they are W-2'd at the end of the year. So you'll collect a W-4, a VA-4, and an I-9 from these members to put them on your payroll system. So that's something that we're interested in seeing that you have. And then financial reporting. We have this is a cost reimbursement grant. So we ask each month, the 10th of every month after the month of the expenses, you submit a periodic expense report so we can reimburse you. So who's doing that? Is it the program director, or is it a combination of people who are doing the financial reporting? And then obviously information technology. It's vitally important to protect PII, personal identifiable information. You're getting member social security numbers, you're getting their birth certificates, you're getting their home addresses, their emails, their phone numbers. And so making sure that you have a system internally to make sure that you're protecting PII. Any questions on separation of duties? we'll keep it moving. So here are the buckets of AmeriCorps management. And these are the types of things that we would look, and not that you have to know them all, especially when you're first applying, but these are the types of things that your organization is going to be responsible for. And when we get into the models, you'll see how they work. But there's program management, member management, and fiscal management. Program management is all things about your program, right? So it's what's your training calendar? How are you training? Who's involved in the training? How are you supervising your members? Identifying who the supervisors are, doing the training for the supervisors, recruiting the members, getting them set up in the payroll system, making sure that your performance measures match exactly what your members are doing. So getting their position descriptions up and ready, posting the position, worrying about retention. So how your members, are they staying in your program? Once you're recruiting them and placing them, are they staying? So that's program management, all things, kind of the bigger picture. And then member management gets, down to more the nitty gritty where it's, okay, my members are serving at a site. Are they required to report data to me, like based on what their service is? At the host site level, what are they doing day to day? They have to report their hours. So are we making sure that they're filling out timesheets? I will tell you, once you work with AmeriCorps members, like, and if you've worked with volunteers, you probably experienced this. Something happens almost daily where you're like, I would never have thought that this would happen. And people leave for various reasons. So we're just making sure they're having a good service experience, and that you're compliant. So there's terms and conditions that come with this. So there's different aspects of working with a member. They have to have a service agreement. They have to fill out a timesheet. They get a living allowance. And so making sure all those things are working in tandem, and then also meeting with your member to make sure that they're achieving their goals. The last part of it is fiscal management. I kind of touched on that. So expense reporting, fiscal compliance. Are you charging the grant allowable expenses based on your approved budget? Is essentially what we're asking. And then budgeting. And sometimes you have to do a budget modification. We understand that we're planning budgets a year in advance of your program starting. So just working with the commission on that kind of thing. And then managing in-service benefits, which we haven't really talked about, but some folks do like a housing allowance, or you could do like a bus pass, and so we just want to make sure that those things are allowable. And if they are charged to the budget, how are you doing it and what's your methodology?
Can I just hop in real quick, Sam?
Please.
So one thing that I would just highlight for folks that are kind of thinking about how this would apply to them is you can also think about it in a way of like managing your program as far as like the service that's being provided to the community, managing your members as far as like them and their professional development, and then also kind of managing all the infrastructure that keeps the program going. So if I have a tutoring program at an elementary school, I might think about program management, like keeping the tutoring program operational. I might think about member management, making sure that my tutors are trained and ready to, equipped and ready to serve in the capacity that I've engaged them in. And then fiscal management, thinking about, somebody is making sure that they get their living allowances and that all of their benefits in service are being distributed as, per our policies. So that's another way to kind of consider. And then we'll talk more about planning grants at the end, but also thinking about kind of like who's doing the planning process, right? Like how is the planning grant, happening in terms of a design element? Who's kind of thinking about who needs to be a part of the planning grant process? And then are you actually spending your planning grant funding and making sure that, all of the reporting on that end is being taken care of as well?
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So there's different models of staffing. Like I said, we'll go through three. When we look at the budget, we'll look at personnel expenses and look at what position the program person holds, what their title is. We ask that you name them usually if you have it. If it's vacant, you can put vacant. How many of those people, you'll see in the different models, their salary and the percent of time that they're spending on the grant. In the last session, I brought up, does AmeriCorps or does a commission have a recommendation about the equivalent of full-time employment that you put on the grant? And we don't. We would say, though, if we saw like you had one staff charge the grant and it was only 10% of their time, we might ask a lot of questions about that. So let me just jump right into it. This is one of our programs, a literacy lab. They operate, I think, in Newport area, the Richmond area, and Danville area. So they have one regional program director who's at, I believe, 75% of their time. They have one program manager they have 3 program associates, and they have 5 coaching specialists. And those 5, 8, 9 positions are all 100%. Well, excuse me. So I don't know, Annalise, if you could just talk about how they work with the members and what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. So for Literacy Lab, they have 3 tiers of support that kind of each focus on different components of the members' experience and the program itself. So program staff are kind of the member management piece. So they're making sure that members have what they need and that they're able to serve on a daily basis at their assigned site. Internal coaches are school staff, so they're not necessarily employed by the Literacy Lab. You won't see them on their budget, but these are host sites that are kind of contributing in-kind support for members. And then coaching specialists are specifically focused on the intervention, right? So our members conducting the activities that they were trained to conduct in a way that has fidelity to the program model itself. So you'll see program staff doing a lot of those duties directly with member recruitment, member attainment, all of the professional development training as far as like, learning more about the career path and different things like that. The internal coaches are really going to be making sure that on a day-to-day basis, the member is meeting with students and has service, has what they need to do the service. And then coaching specialists are really that trained professional specialists, making sure that the service that the members are providing is what they said it would be in their application.
Great. And I will say this is a national program, so they have a very robust staff. And they even have more folks that are not on this list. This list is considered covered that work on their program as well. So this is another model, Aspire After School Learning. They're in Arlington. They have 24 members, and they have 1 program director, and then which is over the whole AmeriCorps program. So overall, the program aspect, the management aspect, and I believe she does the fiscal aspect as well. But she's the larger picture person, and then they have a Learning Rocks program director, a manager, an associate, and then AmeriCorps associate. So they have 5 covered staff. They also have an executive director who's pretty much very involved in their AmeriCorps program as well. So Annalise, if you want to highlight how they support their members.
Yeah, absolutely. So the AmeriCorps program director is sort of the lead circus conductor, train conductor, right? And so making sure that everything is going according to plan and providing support where needed. The program director and the program manager are a little more hands-on, so making sure that members are meeting expectations and completing their required trainings and all that kind of thing. I should have mentioned the program director is also making sure that the fiscal components of the program are operating as planned, so that the reports are being submitted, reimbursements are being received, all of that kind of thing. And then the associates are really kind of focused on supporting the members in their day-to-day service. So hopefully you're starting to see a little bit of a trend where there's a person with a program management mind thinking about how all of this is kind of working on a big picture. There's usually folks that are thinking specifically about the member aspect, so our members being recruited and retained. And then also there's somebody who's kind of working directly with members in a really hands-on, like day-to-day operations piece. And a lot of these boundaries can be a little bit blurred of like, it's not saying that the AmeriCorps program director is never going to direct a member in their day-to-day service, but it is kind of saying, is there somebody assigned that has accountability over these different pieces so that if something goes, maybe not according to plan, that there's somebody who's kind of watching and able to respond in a timely fashion to make sure that things can kind of continue operating and that members have meaningful service to contribute throughout their term.
Perfect. And what you haven't seen on either of these so far, and probably not on the next one either, is the potential like site supervisors. So if they're placing members at other sites, not only their own, those individual site supervisors or organizational staff are not pictured on here. So there's other staff that are working on the grant as well.
Site supervisors and fiscal folks are, I would say that, and Samantha, correct me if I'm wrong, but are often least often show up in the budget themselves. They'll be mentioned in the grant narratives when you're talking about supervision and organizational capacity. So when you're thinking about your operational program, those folks are key individuals, but likely the time that they're spending is small enough that oftentimes folks will not necessarily include them in their budget as covered staff, but they do identify them in their applications to kind of say, this is how we're going to have internal controls. This is how we're going to manage, manage things as they go along. And so that's just important, I think, to keep in mind as you're thinking about preparing an operational grant application or your AmeriCorps program design to consider, those people are all important members of the team. They may not show up on your budget, but it's still important to be able to identify them.
Yeah. And you can, we can talk about it next week, use them as match. But there's a whole lot that goes into that if they're not spending a crucial amount of time on the program. Edifatoro is also in Arlington area. They have a director of programs, youth programs lead, a workforce development lead. So that's their only covered staff. And that's 3 compared to the other ones, which is 5 and 10. So different models for different number of members. They're similar in size. Literacy Lab is the largest, but if you want to talk about how Edifatoro supports their team.
Yeah, and this is pretty concise. So they, similar to how Aspire might have program managers and associates, Edifaturo has 2 team leads. So these folks are really responsible for the member and the program management. They do work pretty closely, I think, with other Edifaturo staff to make sure that members have meaningful service and that they've got plenty to do to fill their hours and all that kind of thing. But as far as how they think about their program and member management, it's pretty consolidated under these team leads. And then the team lead works closely with the director of programs to make sure that everything is covered. And then, like we were saying, their fiscal staff aren't necessarily identified here, but work closely with their team leads and the director of programs to make sure that all the reporting happens, as needed and on the correct timeline.
Perfect. Thank you. So things we look for when we're talking about staffing, when we talk about, if the staffing structure is well built, then you're going to be compliant, you're running your program successfully, you're going to be recruiting members. So is it clear that your staff has managed programming in some form or fashion? I imagine if your organization is long running, then you and your staff, unless they're all new, have managed a program and serve your beneficiaries in some form or fashion. This one's special. If you have an AmeriCorps alum on staff, they have experience with AmeriCorps. Depending on what program they were in, if it was Vista or NCCC, they may not have AmeriCorps state experience, but the member experience is just as important as running a successful program. We talk about working with beneficiaries. The roles are clear and outlined. So who's working with the members? Is there fiscal oversight other than the person who's named the program director? That's just smart internal controls. So one person just isn't holding everything. And are there support staff available? So the program's not just being run by one person. So if that person leaves, what happens? And we do have programs that have one person, and luckily they were able to retain the previous program director as like a consultant, but that's not always possible. So if you're having one person hold the bag, and then they leave, all your institutional knowledge about AmeriCorps and a successful program is going to go out the door. But I'm sure everyone has, experience with that when there's staff turnover. And then we want to know that the staff is named, their experience is listed. We don't have to get resumes or anything, but we just want to understand that you're running your program with fidelity. And then do you have to hire new staff that has to be trained? Over the course of the 4.5 years that I've been here, we've had tons of staff turnover in our grantees. And we need to know that just so we can make sure that you're running criminal history checks, that you're making sure that they're covered. Like, there's a whole litany of things that need to happen when there's new staff. And we have a checklist for that. Obviously, we support you in that endeavor. But it's just important to know if you're going to be hiring folks or if they're seasoned at your organization. Annalise, if you want to talk about planning grants.
Absolutely. So for a lot of what we've been talking about has been related to members and their service. And so so it's easy to kind of think like, okay, I don't need to worry about this yet, which is true. If you're in a planning grant process, you don't necessarily need to come into your planning grant having known exactly who's going to, be signing off on your members' timesheets. But I do think that a lot of these core components are still helpful if you're considering a planning grant. So for your planning grant, instead of kind of thinking about program management and who's going to manage your members in their day-to-day service, we want to know who's going to be on your planning team. Really, and that's less because we want to follow up with them or anything like that, but we just want to know, is this something that your organization is undertaking by yourself? Is this something that your organization is, collaborating with others on? We want to kind of get a sense of what the scope of the project is and how many organizations are going to be impacted. And then also think about this as a demonstration grant opportunity as well. So you're showing us kind of what you have in place to lead a future AmeriCorps program. So again, that's not to say you need all of your fiscal infrastructure that you're planning on using in an operational grant when you have members, but telling us your grants management experience is really helpful when we're considering, how planning grant funding is allocated so that we can make sure that we're that we're getting funding to folks that have the capacity to manage it, and that if there's any concerns about capacity, that we can help connect you with the resources that you need. Maybe it's an intermediary partner, maybe it's a fiscal sponsor, to make sure that both funds are managed in a compliant fashion, and also that you're supported, and that eventually that support can transfer to successful and meaningful AmeriCorps member experiences in the future.
I think that brings us to the end. We have about 4 minutes left in our half-hour series. If anyone has any questions, or this is really, like Annalise said, targeted towards operational grants, but I'm feeling folks on the call are interested in planning grants, and we definitely encourage that. And information about, I think Annalise is pretty explicit, or pretty good about what we would be looking for when it comes to staffing a planning grant.
And I would also make this quick. We get this question somewhat frequently about planning grants, where if you are interested in applying for a planning grant, but you don't anticipate yourself being the operational grant if you anticipate yourself being part of a collaborative, right, you can still apply for the planning grant, even if you don't think you'll be the one that will eventually hold a operational grant. But especially in that case, we want to know kind of who's going to be involved in the planning grant process to make sure that there's a strong fiscal sponsor when you're ready to apply for operational funding.